Thanks everyone for joining us today for the weekly Wednesday workshop. I'm Felicia Bell, located in the Gulf States Regional Office in Jackson, Mississippi. We welcome everyone today for the winter cover crops with our specialist in our Texas office, and I definitely will allow him to introduce himself and give a little backstory, Justin Duncan. But we welcome everyone today and just appreciate you being here. And so I will pass it over to Justin to introduce himself and give a little backstory how even what he loves horticulture. So how did he get into that?
All right, thanks, Felicia. So I wasn't expecting backstory time, but I guess my story starts when I was real little. I was always out helping my dad in the backyard, in the front yard and stuff with his plants, and he used to get yard of the month all the time. So I started kidnapping his plants or cuttings of his plants and putting them in my own little spot in the backyard. And I kind of taught myself the basics of plant propagation when I was about 6 years old. Fast forward, when I was leaving the United States Army, they told us something that kind of changed my direction in life. I was originally, planning on going to school for computers, but when I was leaving the Army, they said, "You just spent the last however many years in the Army doing what we told you to do. Now it's time for you to get out there and do something that you want to do." And I kind of reevaluated my plan because I wanted to go to school for computers because that's where all the money was back in the 90s. And I was like, you know what? I really love plants. So I'm going to go to school for plants. And so a few of my cousins had gone to University of Houston. So I went over there and I asked them about horticulture. And they looked at me like I literally had dirt on me. And they told me that I needed to go to an agriculture school for that. And so I asked them where the nearest ag school was. And they said Prairie View. So I went over to Prairie View and I asked them about horticulture. And they was like, "Well, son, we've got agronomy." And they took me under their wing and they taught me everything they knew. So now I'm here to share some of that with y'all. All right, so I'm going to talk about winter cover crops because I love cover crops in general. Winter cover crops, they're hit or miss with me because I like to produce vegetables, and so the winter cover crops are kind of blocking some of my vegetables. But I use rotation, so I don't have all my fields in vegetables at the same time. And so for those that are resting, I use some cover crops. And I want to talk to you all today about why cover cropping is so important. So this is one reason. If y'all see this soil, it's not a happy soil. It is basically denuded of organic matter. And that's a really major problem in crops throughout the South. And I thought our audience was going to be mostly from the southern states, but I saw that somebody chimed in from Pennsylvania, which is definitely not a southern state. I don't even know if they have soil problems up there. It's so far north. All right, so this is kind of typical of what I like to do. If I'm going to transition a vegetable crop into a cover crop, I like to kind of mix the two so that the vegetable crop kind of hands the field over to the cover crop. This is a broccoli and clover combination. And typically what I would do is the year before, I let my crimson clover go to seed. And over the summer, it's so hot here that seed just remains dormant. So it's dormant over the summer, and then in the fall, when it starts to germinate, I like to I see the little clover seedlings germinating, and that lets me know to transplant broccoli into that clover. And so as the broccoli, as it develops, then and it's exhausted, and then the clover is already in place. It already just takes over that field. And if you'll notice, there's no weeds in this field, and that's because there was never a chance for weeds to establish, because there was barely any time period where there was bare ground. It went from preparing the soil to clover seedlings to broccoli transplants to clover filling the entire field. So that is how I prevent this. This is not how you want your soil. You want your soil to be full of plant roots, full of organic matter, and all that. All right, so one of the concepts that I like to get people to understand is that your soil is not meant to be hit by solar radiation. It's meant to be covered at all times. And so on this slide, you see you have a shade, and there's a transition from the shaded side to more exposed. As you get more exposed, and the exposure is coming from lack of debris or lack of vegetative cover. So as you're going from that scale from more shaded to more exposed, you're losing the fungal hypha, which is breaking down the debris, which is turning that debris into humus. That's your organic matter. That's the source of your organic matter. So the soil temperature under the shaded side is a bit lower. So, excuse me. Excuse me. So you have a chance for soil moisture to build up, for fungal hypha to build up, and organic matter to build up. On the other side, since you've got solar radiation just pounding the soil, you're denuded of the moisture, of the fungal hypha, and of the organic matter. And so your temperature is higher. So you're losing organic matter in this exposed soil. I don't like that. It's not a good situation. So cooler areas, they tend to have more soil organic matter. That organic matter is more sensitive to loss at higher temperatures. And in cool areas, the average temperature rises 1 degree. You expect to lose about 10% soil organic matter. But in a warm area, that same rise will only result in about a 3% loss of soil organic matter. Now, you have to understand that on these cooler area soils with the high organic matter, they've got, around 5 to 6 or 4% organic matter. In these hotter areas, like down here in Texas, we're seeing 1%. We're seeing lower than 1% soil organic matter. So 3% loss of 1% is not that much, but it's all very significant when you as a cumulative effect. All right, so the soils maintain a large reservoir of water in their organic matter. The hotter it becomes, the more water is lost, but also the more organic matter is lost. So the loss of organic matter leads to a loss of soil holding capacity. The less water in the soil, the hotter the ambient temperature become, and it's a self-replicating cycle of heating. It's bad, because the hotter it gets, the less water the soil holds. So you fix that by having plenty of vegetative cover over the soil. All right, so with soil organic matter decomposition, hot and humid areas need twice the inputs of organic matter to maintain fertility. And this is each growing cycle. This is not every year, this is each growing cycle. So down here, we can have several growing cycles in one season, depending on the crop. So if you use no-till, you lose about half of conventional tillage's losses in soil organic matter. But using no-till then, if all things are equal in hot areas, it should equalize, but it really doesn't, because it's very hard to incorporate all that extra organic matter if you've got a no-till system. Let's say you've got a field full of cover crops, and you want to get it into the soil, but it's a no-till system, so you can't really incorporate it very well. So one good thing about soil organic matter is it disperses negative effects. So the organic molecules, and these are huge long chain molecules, they bind to toxic soil minerals. So like things down here, we've got iron and manganese in the well water. These are reduced to less toxic levels by dispersion in humus. Aluminum, basically organic acids disarm free aluminum in soils. They're bound. So you all know that aluminum is highly toxic to plant roots. So being able to, and this is especially important in highly weathered, like tropical soils and subtropical soils and all that, where there's a lot more aluminum content in the soil. When you strip away vegetation in the rainforest, those soils are initially very fertile, but very, very quickly they become not so fertile because of this aluminum toxicity that's built up because there's no organic matter in the soil anymore. All right, so in building soil organic matter, I'm in a hot place. So, and people get mad at me about this, but I don't care. I don't compost because it's too hot for me to compost. You know, I feel like it increases the volatilization of nitrates and carbon. So all the stuff that you're trying to get from composting, all the good stuff, is turning into gases and leaving. And I don't want that. So instead of composting, I use deep mulching. Manure is one way you can build soil organic matter, but it's bulky and it's messy to move. And if you're certified organic, there's withdrawal regulations. But cover crops, they grow organic matter in place. There's no withdrawal period. They add nitrogen. And that's if you're using legumes with their proper rhizobium. And it also moves minerals from subsoil into topsoil and increases soil porosity, which increases infiltration, which increases the amount of water that can be stored in your soil instead of it running off. So you can mow and incorporate them, you can mow and mulch them, or you can use no-till systems. So how do you choose cover crops? You've got to look at what kind of soil you've got, your pH, the soil, the texture. Is your soil droughty? Does it flood? Does it pond? What diseases are in your soil? All that sort of stuff. It's very important to know your growing seasons and the cycles. You know, I try not to use, or I don't use pesticides, because I'd like to pick, you know, crops that are going to grow in this season and they don't need a lot of care. So if you match your cover crops with the timing of when you're going to put your cash crops or your vegetable crops in, you can kind of escape some things and get away from pests, break up disease cycles and all that sort of thing. So it's very important to understand the relationship between your cover crop and the next crop you're going to put in. Is there allelopathy present? Is that allelopathy, is it deleterious to the crop you're planting, or is it deleterious to the weeds that you expect to have the next season? Sometimes going between like vegetable crops and cover crops, there's some different equipment requirements. If you're a vegetable producer, you might not have haying equipment. You might not have the things necessary to deal with a cover crop. And then weed control. That's the main thing. Like with organic producers, you've got to be able to get ahead of these weeds and control them. And can your cover crop do that? And I just had a call from a guy out in West Texas, and he's got field bindweed or the Ipomea purpurea, the good old morning glories. And so we're trying to come up with a way that he can cut down those populations, because he's on thousands of acres. He can't just use what I would use on small acreage farm, which would be a reciprocating spader, and pop up all those roots and kill them. So he's got to have some other methods of controlling that. All right, so some of the following cover crops, they do well over the winter. They're just handy facts, no means comprehensive. And for more information, you can use the related ATTRA publications. But before I get into that, I want to talk about inoculation. I love legumes. Legumes are my best friends, but you have to use the right rhizobium for your legumes. If you use the wrong rhizobium, it does not do what it's supposed to do. And in fact, rhizobium probably started off as a plant disease. And if you have the wrong rhizobium on your legume, it's not only going to not produce nitrogen for the legume, it's going to kind of, sap that legume's strength a little bit, because, it's getting all the benefits from the plant. It's getting, a place to stay, it's getting carbohydrates, but it's not pulling its fair share. It's not pulling its weight, not doing its fair share. It's not giving that plant back those nitrogen compounds. Also, some rhizobium persists in the soil better than others, and you don't need to reapply them every year. And down here, it's the cowpea inoculant, or a cowpea rhizobium. That's very present in our soils, as well as the pea rhizobium. And because we've got vetch growing all over the place, and then a lot of the native legumes here in Texas, they'll work with that cowpea rhizobium. Excuse me. So other rhizobiums are more ephemeral, and they've got to be applied to seed at each planting. And there's some controversy around that, the store-bought rhizobium that come in the bag. And there's some folks who really believe that the store-bought bagged rhizobium really isn't that effective. And I would look at the operator on that. That was one of my favorite things in the Army. I was an armorer. I was a unit armorer, right? So all these guys would bring me their dirty weapons and try to get me to clean them. And I'll be like, that's an operator level deficiency. Favorite thing to say. Same thing with this rhizobium. I think a lot of it's just from operator error, or people not understanding the biology of the rhizobium. And I think people would get a lot better results if they would prepare their soil to receive the rhizobium. And that means look at how rhizobium acts in nature. It's kind of saprophytic if it's not with a legume. So you have to have provided the organic matter in the soil for it to persist on its own and persist long enough for the roots to absorb the rhizobium and start the nodulation process. All right, I just wanted to sidebar into another thing that's near and dear to my heart is, people have problems with their crops, pests, diseases, all that sort of, and less resistance to abiotic stresses, because there's not enough micronutrients and trace elements in the soil. So think about that when in your fertilization schemes. It's not all about just nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. You've got some other things that are very important to plant biology in there too that are needed. All right, so this is just a nice picture of some cover crops that are growing in between. And this picture is sago palm. So some of the cover crops that I like over the wintertime are the trifoliums or clovers. If you're also running livestock, and just be aware that clover can cause bloat in cattle and other ruminants as well. So you don't want a pure stand of clover and release livestock out there because there's something to do with its what's it called, acid detergent fibers or lack thereof in the clover that makes a foam and causes the livestock to bloat. But if you're just grazing vegetables, like you saw with the broccoli, it's a great cover crop to come into the fall and grow over the winter. It uses clover inoculant. There's several different useful species. It's very adaptable. My personal favorite is crimson clover. It's always performed very well for me, except for down in the lower Rio Grande Valley of Texas. It's effective at nitrogen fixation, and it's an excellent feed for pollinators. This is important if you're using if you raise bees. That's always nice because it makes excellent honey. And then the other thing is that if you've got tree crops with low nutritive value in their pollen and nectar, like almonds, clover pairs well with those. Next is buckwheat. Buckwheat isn't exactly a winter cover crop. It's good in that transitional period between the fall and winter because it germinates so quickly. Within 3 days, it's up. So it smothers weeds very quickly, and it matures in about 40 days from seed to flower. It's from seed to flower in 40 days. So it's an excellent feed for pollinators. And it's also a phosphorus mobilizer. So it's able to move phosphorus around and make it more available for the next crop. And it's also a good soil conditioner. Its roots aren't too deep. They're up there on the surface, but they're deep enough to where they can break up a little bit of crushing and all that. All right, so this is the field of buckwheat, and as you can see, it's done a pretty good job of mothering weeds, except for there's some volunteer oats in there. All right, so Medicago and Medicago includes alfalfa. They're tough, but they can kind of be weedy. They're excellent for pollinators. Alfalfa makes pretty good honey. It fixes between 100 and 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Good soil conditioner, and it's been found to enhance wine flavor when grown with grapes. So that's some of those extra benefits of having cover crops. This is what it looks like. Now, the purple flowers are Phacelia. That's not Medicago. Medicagos they have leaves very similar to clover, and many people think they are clover. But if you look, the difference between Medicago and trifolium is the little extension on the rachis on the leaflet. All right, so next is Pyson, and this is field peas or Austrian winter peas. To me, they're soft, and when I say soft, the vegetative mass is soft. It's ephemeral. It breaks down quite nicely. It doesn't leave a lot of woody material, a lot of things that take too long to break down. It's one of my favorites because I use I use the Austrian winter peas as a blanket to smother the summer weeds for the next season. So I planted in October. Excuse me. Planted in October, and then in May, it's too hot and it starts to die. So by June, you've got this mat of dead material that the summer weeds are trying to germinate or trying to come out of their dormancy underneath. And so I've used this to smother out Johnson grass, Bermuda grass, nutsedge, and pigweed. It's very effective on those summer weeds that are really tough, give me a lot of problems. I would have this nice blanket of dead Austrian winter peas to cover that out. Then after June, I would go ahead and incorporate that and replant immediately with another cover crop, or depending on what I planted the season ahead, a cash crop, because I would always use 2 cover crops back to back and then do my cash crop. So if it was if the field peas were the second cover crop in the sequence, then I would go immediately into sweet potatoes. And sweet potatoes are a pretty good cover crop themselves. And then coming to the fall, I would follow up with another cover crop, and that would last over the winter. And then the next spring, I would come in with spring type crops. So that's those seasons and cycles that I was talking about. And it's also good for erosion control. These are some Austrian winter peas that we grew down in South Texas. This is in a very droughty situation. They only get about 20 inches of rainfall per year. So these made, to me, this would not be a good stand, but for them, this was a pretty good stand for what we were dealing with weather-wise. So then you've got the Vicious, and we've got 2 really great cover crops that are within Vicious, and that's Fava Beans, and then the other one is Vetch. Fava Beans are big, and Vetch, they're little. They're prostrate little vines, and they run everywhere and scramble over stuff. They're another one that's very good at making that mat of vegetative matter like their cousins, the peas. Fava beans stand straight up. They're nice and erect. Now for me, they get about 5 feet in the field, and they do this really nice thing. When it gets too cold for them, in Texas too cold, not Pennsylvania too cold, they kind of, the tops wilt, they kind of lay over like, ouch, I'm hurting. But when the sun comes out, they pop back up, and that was really nice. The Vicious, like I said, the Vetch, like I said, they're vining, they scramble all over the place. Fava beans have the added benefit of being edible. They make nice, big, delicious, broad beans. But the Vetch, they're tiny and they look like sweet peas, but I wouldn't try to eat them. Both of them are very tolerant, and they're good nitrogen fixers. They use the same inoculant as peas. So you've got Rye Grass, which is lolium. It's allelopathic. It makes good biomass, good organic matter, and it's cheap. And I generally don't like grasses, but rye grass is a pretty good cover crop. Then you've got cereal rye. So rye grass is lolium. Cereal rye is Cicale cereale up here. So they're not too close, very they're not that close. This is a phylogenetic tree. I don't, if y'all are familiar with them, this shows how related different genera are, or species in some cases. So this thing, Festuca, is also called a ryegrass. So both Lolium and Festuca are considered ryegrasses. Then you've got Avena, which is oats, then Hordeum, barley, then cereal rye. Cereal rye, then wheat. And then over here, you've got rice. So anyway, is allelopathic. Allelopathic means that it suppresses other plants by chemical means. It also produces good organic matter, good biomass, and you use about 60 to 90 pounds of seed per acre. And it's deep rooted, so it relieves soil compaction. That's what cereal rye looks like grown down here at one of the experiment stations. Then you got triticale. And triticale takes the first part of its name from wheat and the second part of its name from rye, because it is a cross between wheat and rye. So it has a lot of traits between the two. And then since it's a hybrid and it's an intergeneric hybrid, so there's quite a bit of vigor in there. It's pretty good at suppressing other crops or other plants, weeds specifically, by the force of its biomass alone. And then you use about 80 pounds of seed per acre. It's pretty drought tolerant, and it's got good salinity tolerance as well. So then you've got the brassicas, and I'm not going to spend too much time on the brassicas. Just know that there are foraged turnips, daikon radish, and black mustard, and some other mustards. And they're also good cover crops, but we don't really have time to go into all that today. So I'm going to go ahead and end this. For any more information, you can email me and look up the corresponding publications in ATTRA.
Thanks, Justin. That was so informative. I got notes galore.
All right.
I appreciate that so much. So if you want to come, I am going to curate the questions in the chat, but we're going to use this time. If you want to unmute yourself, please, you can unmute yourself at this time and you can ask your question.
My name is Nadine. I have a question, but I'm having a little bit of trouble forming my question because some of this was a little bit over my head. When you were talking about ground cover and clover and was it kale? I think you were saying that something about it being legume rhizobian, or did I get that confused? And kind of put that on a 5th grade level, if that's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So legumes are, your beans, your peas, that sort of thing. They form a relationship with a bacteria in the soil. That bacteria and the beans, they get together in the roots, and the roots form a structure called a nodule. It looks like a teeny tiny potato, and inside of that nodule, if you break it open, it should be pink. If it's pink or like a salmon color, like almost a diluted blood color almost, it's doing its job. It's feeding the legume. If you break it open, in most cases, and you see like black or you see green or brown or anything besides that pink. Now I think there are a few of the Brady rhizobium, a different species. I think some of them will turn green, but in most cases, it's got to be pink. If you break it open as any other color, then that bacteria is acting as a disease on the host plant instead of being its friend. It's now taking the energy away from the plant. Is that better?
That is better. But now I just want to know so if I understood the legume, but I didn't understand how that relationship created ground cover exactly. But that makes it a lot easier for me to understand. So what two plants, tell me again, what two plants I need to put together? Is it the rye and the kale? Is that?
Oh, you're talking about
Any
you're talking about the slide with the vegetables?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
you had a slide where you were talking about your ground cover was clover.
Uh-huh.
And there was it kale that you planted?
It was broccoli.
Broccoli.
Broccoli. Okay. Broccoli.
You can use kale.
Okay. So if I have a garden, just say my garden is 50 by 85. And when I take my fall crop out, which will probably be December or January, is it okay to plant the clover at that time, or is it too late?
No, you can plant clover. Well, where are you at, first of all?
Okay, you're gonna laugh. Kruger, Mississippi.
Oh.
All right.
Yeah,
That's right on time for Halloween.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, okay. I'm not sure, are you in the north of the state or the south of the state or in the middle?
I mean, like just Midwest. I'm kind of in the center of the state, west.
Okay.
Okay. Felicia,
well, I know you're not from Mississippi, so I'm
Miss Nadine, are you actually in the Delta though? Are you that far northwest?
You can go about 3/4 of a mile from my house and you dip straight down into the Delta. I could throw a rock from my house to the Delta, but I'm actually in the hills.
So you're right there on the line though.
Holmes County is about 3/4 hills and about a third Delta.
Delta, yeah.
I'm right there on that border. I mean, I could almost slip down into the Delta.
Okay, so Felicia, my question for you, so I can better help her, is like here, it's time to plant clover.
Yes.
I'm good.
Yep.
Yeah, I can plant clover all day.
Yeah.
But out there, is it still time to plant clover?
Yeah, so we usually do fall stuff here in October. If you're going to plant anything, it'll be October here too.
Okay.
So I could mingle it with my fall garden. I could just go out there down the middle of the rows and plant clover.
Yes, ma'am. Everywhere you're planting clover, that's less of an opportunity for weeds to pop up.
Awesome. This has been really, really helpful. Thank you.
And then, go ahead, Jess. I'm sorry.
Then if you let it go to seed, crimson clover is a pretty garden plant. It makes a nice red flower. If you let it go to seed, let it dry all the way up, turn it under, then you don't have to buy that seed again next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it'll just come up on its own when it's time.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And then that Austrian winter pea, Miss Nadine, will grow. That will grow here. I like, because you know we get inundated just because we're all in the South with a lot of grass and weeds. So clover would do the same thing, but I like that matting that Justin spoke of. If we could suppress those weeds a little bit and hopefully suppress it totally, it really helps us in the long run with our spring crops.
See, that is my big struggle.
Yes, ma'am, I know.
And I can't, at this point in my life and my age, I can't go out there and chop it like I used to. So
Mhm.
what kind of beans did you say, or peas?
It was that, just to remind me, it was the Austrian winter pea or the field pea. Was that correct?
Austrian winter peas, yeah.
Okay. And then
And can
maybe,
that be found at any seed store?
will you be able to get it?
Yeah, usually, I don't know what y'all got out there. We've got like producers co-op and in the
Yep.
forest and all that. We just go over to the feed store and tell them we need some Austrian winter peas, and they'll.
So, but something substitute for the Austrian runner peas if we don't have that available here?
Sure, you can use Clover. You can use vetch.
I mean, a different kind of pea.
I think
Uh,
just that we may in our co-ops is probably gonna be field pea. I really got, I think they're not, it
So field
depends.
would be the same almost.
now, now, when you're saying field pea, is it like the cowpea field pea?
See, that's what I think we're gonna more so have here. It's very hard when we start getting into these specific varieties. A lot of our co-ops just don't have them. You
Right.
gotta order it for yourself.
And right now, our co-ops have, I doubt if you could find a pound of peas in the state of Mississippi, because, well, the preference, the kind we prefer, are very difficult to find because of all of the new farmers. So I was just trying to find something that we could actually locate here, that I could
Well,
actually go to my co-op and say, do you have this or can you get it?
if
Mhm.
you ask them, they'll be able to get it.
And it's Austrian pea.
Yes, Austrian field,
Austrian
Austrian winter pea or
winter
field pea, because there is a Pyson. There is a type of Pyson type pea that is also called a field pea. I think it's just related to where you're at in the country. That's why I don't like common names.
Yeah, yeah. And then Miss Nadine, I put my email address in the chat so I can help you because I'm here in Mississippi. And then also start assisting you with working with landscape fabric as well as biodegradable fabric and so forth with your weeds. So please email me so we can get started with just assisting you with kind of, maintaining this grass. It's hard for us, but we can do it.
Yeah, I will, because you have been a tremendous help in the past. I've been to hundreds of your presentations, your workshops. So I'm
Yes,
gonna
ma'am. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else that wants to unmute themselves and ask a question before I move to the chat?
I have a question. Justin talked about using the cover crops to remove toxins from the soil. And then when you do that, does it break the toxins down such that they can be reincorporated in the soil, or do you need to discard the dead cover crops at the end of their season?
So that's a really great question, because I also have another presentation that I do. It's called Gardening Despite Heavy Metals, and it talks about bioremediation and all that. So it depends on what toxin it is. If it's a natural toxin like the aluminum or the iron and manganese and all that, it doesn't really need to move out of the soil profile. It was there before, it's going to be there after. Now, if you're talking about like cadmium or lead or, those toxic industrial metals, then those pose a lot of moral questions, because you can use like sunflowers to pull lead out of the soil and some of the heavy metals, because sunflowers are greedy and they absorb all the minerals from through mass flow. They're like little vacuum cleaners. Their roots are like vacuum cleaners in the soil. They pick up everything and incorporate it into themselves. And if let's say that there's not enough iron in a plant, or in fact in your body, and there's lead present, the lead will fill in any space where iron is supposed to go. So sunflowers can pull up that lead and all that, but then what do you do with the field full of sunflowers that are full of lead? You know, the only ethical thing to do with them, because you can't burn them because you're going to put that lead in the atmosphere. You can't till them back under because you're just moving the lead, you know, from the plant back into the soil. So the only ethical thing really is to send it to the landfill, which is also another terrible choice. So, you know, you're just left with a bunch of bad choices. I guess the best thing to do is not get that stuff in the soil in the first place.
So if you were to, let's say you pull all the sunflowers, what if you had a designated place on your farm or property that was just dedicated to non-edibles, and create a big refuse pile there? Would that be reasonable? Because the lead's got to go somewhere.
Well,
Whether it's in
now
your
you're
body-
creating a Superfund site.
So where would that lead legally or correctly belong? In a landfill?
Yeah, you'd have to send it. You'd have to send it to a landfill, and of course, you know, doing that is just so. It's like cost prohibitive. It's unwieldy. It's kind of impractical. So
Well, we have a community orchard that's has one section of it does have lead contaminants, so we haven't been able to utilize it for anything. It's just covered in 8 feet of gravel, I think. And I was wondering if there was any remedy for that other than just keeping it there.
wow.
Justin, let me ask you a question. So could you create the concrete compost spacing? Like for NRCS, they have the animal compost thing they offer now as a practice, but it's concrete. So we could get in with, you know, a skid steer front end loader and turn and so forth and pick up animals and put in it. So could you use, I know that's expensive, so I know that, but some people have these types of things already on their land for as a concrete pad. And so would that work where it would not go into the soil, but it could decompose?
So you'd be left with those residues, and then I guess over the years those residues would break down, and then finally you'd have like pure lead or something. Is that what you're aiming for? Or because the other thing that I was thinking when you mentioned concrete, I started thinking about hempcrete, and maybe you could use it as a building material. It's in a plant, so it's not, you know, such highly concentrated lead that it's going to be, you know, like immediately toxic to whoever. But if you could make like a hempcrete type thing out of those sunflower stalks, or you in fact use hemp to pull out the lead, because it'll pull out lead too. Make the hempcrete and then case that in another building material so that hempcrete is at the core, and then it's excluded by the other building material. That might.
Okay. That's different. Do you have any?
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you,
That
Ms. Smith.
And was it Tila?
Tila.
You asked about the pea rhizobium. It's illegal in Oregon. Tell me about that.
Well, I looked for it all the natural garden supply places about a year ago, March. And I finally went to Home Depot and I'm like, can I get this? And they said, no, we're not allowed to sell that in Oregon. And they directed me to a general soil amendment that had some in it with a whole lot of other things. And I haven't been able to find information about that other than this person at Home Depot was just like, no, we're not allowed to sell pea inoculant in Oregon. But I'm curious about building it up in my soil for just ongoing having it cultivated. And I wonder if there's anything we should do after I pull my peas at the end of each season, for example, to nurture the existing rhizobium and protect it.
Well, as long as you've got enough organic matter in the soil, it should persist, especially up there. It's not going to dry out and die like it would in many places down here. So as long as it's got something to eat, good organic matter content and all that, and then you keep growing peas year to year, it should be fine. Now, there's a weird thing about rhizobium. Once it gets locked into a plant, it can't get out. It doesn't build up once it's in the plant. Once it's in the plant, it makes its structure, it lives in there, and then when the plant dies, it dies too. It doesn't spread back to the soil. I don't know why that is, but what it means for you is that you've got to have an alternative source for the rhizobium to feed on when the plant's not present.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ms. Smith. Anna Miller asks, where do we have monumental challenges when it comes to soil health? Like listing maybe some of the states or areas, because she's in Nevada.
Wherever there have been agricultural soils in production for more than 10 years. Because within 10 years, plants are like mines, and if you've got a gold mine and you run out of gold in your gold mine, what do? You move on to another location, right?
Mm-hmm.
Agricultural soils don't have that luxury. They're there. Plants growing in those soils are stuck there. They can't go elsewhere when their chromium runs out, or when their vanadium runs out, or when their manganese runs out, or their magnesium runs out. So what we've taken to do is fertilize those crops, but we're not fertilizing them with the full mineral spectrum that they really need. So that causes the plants to have so many, problems with pests, with diseases, with not being able to withstand drought or flooding or whatever, because they don't have the minerals they need to produce the enzymes and the phytochemicals that they need to keep themselves healthy. So if the plants can't be healthy because the soil is depleted, then how can we be healthy in turn by eating these unhealthy, nutrient-starved plants? So anywhere agricultural production has gone on for more than 10 years, you're having monumental soil health issues.
Okay. Wow.
Would resting the soil for a year or two be helpful? And if I incorporate some of the things that you told me about the ground cover, say if I just quit, for example, if I don't grow in my high tunnel and just for a year and just use one of the ground covers, would that help restore and replenish?
A year it's pretty short. And, when you look at soil, soil moves in slow motion when people are trying to move and fast forward. So, it takes, I think it's 50 years for a centimeter of soil to build up, or some crazy number like that. It takes a long time. Soil is slow. So I know the people back in the days, they recommended letting the soil be fallow for 7 years.
Wow.
Bible says that. Yeah.
Yeah. So letting it go fallow for a year economic terms is kind of hard.
Okay.
Because we're on a different scale. We're using that high tunnel to generate income. We're using those fields to feed our families. Resting it may not be the best option. What I do is I believe in bringing in mushroom compost, or I bring in wood chips. I bring in, you know, what the soil microbiology needs to restore themselves and replenish themselves. Let those other folks deplete their land and cut their trees down and throw that stuff away, and have it and put it on my land and let my land build up. So once you get all that organic matter in, then you get the mycorrhiza buildup, which is a soil fungus that, you know, they set up an exchange between the plants and the soil and the fungus and all that. So mycorrhiza is able to bring it. It acts as a secondary root system. So when a plant, its root ball surrounds that plant, the mycorrhiza, its root ball surrounds like the whole neighborhood. So it has like resources at its disposal that it can bring to your plants, and the plants and the fungus, they exchange. You know, the plants give the fungus a little carbohydrate, the fungus brings the plants minerals. So, you know, if you constantly add in this organic matter, you facilitate that exchange.
That really helps.
Thank you. We have, what cover crop works best for dry clay soils with goats and donkeys foraging on them?
Dry clay soils. Is it calcareous clay? Is it that white clay, that limestone derived clay, or is it red clay?
Let's see. Alex, are you able to come on, or would you like to type it in? Not sure.
Oh, he says in Central Texas.
Texas, yeah.
All right. So my favorite cover crop right now is pigeon peas. So he's saying black fly. I don't know what black fly clay is, but in any case, if it's by like the Elgin area, they've got those cracking black clays. I would try pigeon peas for sure.
Yeah, it's a black land. You say
corn. Okay,
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I would try pigeon peas because pigeon peas they get pretty tall, and they're able to intercept solar radiation very, very well before it hits the soil surface. The only thing is that it needs to be weeded the first 6 to 8 weeks, but once it gets its root gets down to the water in the soil, then it'll take off and cover up everything very effectively. The other thing that'll work is Chemicrysta fasciculata, but both of those, both the pigeon pea and the Chemicrysta, they will work on a soil, but they're summer cover crops. As far as winter cover crops, the clovers should work. Clovers and vetch and the Austrian winter peas, those should all work in blackland clays.
Good. And thank you for bringing up that question, Alice, because I was going to just touch on that because I know we mostly be talking about vegetable producers when we're talking about cover crop, but also definitely can be used in a livestock system and letting those animals terminate it. Definitely, and again, this is on soils that they actually can eat it, not contaminated and toxic soils where you're utilizing cover crop to pull. So we're not talking about that. We're just strictly talking about pastures that you're actually covering with cover crop, but letting the animals terminate it versus utilizing something else and so forth. So it definitely can work within that. It is cover crop charts online that you can pull. I always try to just tell people, if you're starting out with cover crop, regardless of your size, experiment. Don't go buying, 25, 50, 100 pounds, depending on the size of your land. And especially if you're terminating with animals and so forth, see what they need for as nutrient, for as the animal to make them, they are sound for as their minerals. And so you be able to do that research, looking at the cover crop, doing the research on that and seeing how it's going to benefit the animal. And so that's how you could kind of pick the cover crops based upon what you're doing. So if you're a livestock producer, you're going to have certain cover crops. If you're a vegetable producer, you're going to have certain cover crops. But when you're starting out with cover crops, experiment, do, little plots here and there just to see how we do. We all have microclimates and so forth. So just kind of see how it will work on your land. One thing, Justin, I was going to ask you with the Austrian winter peas, when you spoke on those, what did you do for as either broadcast or did you use a no-till drill? How did you put those out?
Oh, I broadcasted those.
Okay.
I would run over the field with a reciprocating spader, then broadcast the winter peas, and then roll them in. Mm-hmm. Do all of that when I knew that there was going to be a storm coming, because they're a larger seed, so they need a little bit more water to germinate than clover, and they take a little bit longer. So I would do that just before a storm, so that they would get they would get a good amount of time to imbibe and germinate and all that, uninterrupted by a dry spell.
Good. And then would you also, what would you suggest for as like perennials? I know some of our cover crops are perennials, but what I mean by that is, would you suggest to some farmers for as just the economics of not having to do this every season or every, growing cycle, what have you, utilizing some of those type of cover crops and then utilizing what you say, either a no-till drill or some kind of methodology of being able, if they're vegetable producers, they can transplant right into them and it will help suppress weeds.
Now, okay, so we were talking about winter cover crops. So like the perennial cover crops, they're more suitable for like pasture or orchard situations. They're gonna have some seasons where they're more prolific than others.
Okay.
So instead of perennial cover crop, what I would do is use a reseeding cover crop. Find one that for your spot. Like for me, it's crimson clover. Crimson clover reseeds very readily here, and it's just awesome. It's just superb for me. Find that cover crop for yourself. Grow several different ones. See if they reseed. You've got to take the long view on it. Don't look at the short term. Look at the long view. And if it's coming back year by year, and you're not having to, buy more seed, then that's the one for you for that season. Then you have to find another one for a different season. And a lot of them, honestly, you're going to end up having to reseed them because they're going to decline gradually over the years. Okay.
I appreciate it.
One really good perennial cover crop for orchards or for groves, you know, if you're far enough south, is the perennial peanuts.
Okay.
Perennial peanuts get about 4 inches tall. They don't need to be mowed. They don't need to be messed with. They just have to be helped while they're establishing, you know, to remain weed free. But once they've established, then they're great on their own.
Okay. Good. I appreciate that. So we've gone over a little, but I definitely want to make sure we're opening it up for any questions. You can do that at this time. Unmute yourself. Definitely Justin and just the Texas office, they stay very, very busy. So I would, you know, tell you to ask Justin all the questions you need while we have him. You definitely can email him, but they stay mighty busy and stuff. So please unmute yourself or drop it in the chat. We'll do a minute or so for that, and then we can jump off.
I had a quick question about peas and beans, using legumes as a cover crop. Do they usually double as a cash crop, or is it just functional as a cover crop?
Good question. Yes, they can double as a cash crop. So peas are a good one for that, because you can sell the young peas, the young pea pods, and then you can also sell the young shoots. And I've seen people sell pea shoots for $8 a pound. So yes, they can be cash crops. And then the same thing with the cowpeas or the Vigna type legumes. We've got purple hull peas, black eye peas, mung beans. Those are all cover crops in addition to being delicious legumes.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, no problem.
Good to know.
One else. So definitely, I think you all was able to see Justin's email address in his presentation. If you think of questions later on, please email him. And again, we will welcome Justin back anytime he wants to come on to even share the one about the bioremediation. That would be a very good one, definitely for our urban growers. They usually have issues with that, not saying rural people don't. But we definitely would love to hear that if you're open and willing, Justin. But we thank everyone for joining us today. And we have Vicki Marone. Let me pull that up for us next week. She will be on. She's organic farming specialist with the Center for Regional Food Systems at Michigan State University. So she will be joining us November 4th and November, let me see, let me make sure, 18th. So November 4th and November 18th, Vicki Marone from Michigan State University. So please join us again. She's again organic farm specialist. So join us at that time, and please share these particular weekly Wednesday workshops with your colleagues, with your farmers, anyone that you feel like it would benefit. We appreciate everyone, and thanks so much for coming today. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you. This has been super helpful for me.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. We appreciate everyone joining us.
All right. Thanks for having me, Felicia.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yes,
All right,
thank
bye,
you.
y'all.
Bye-bye.